Today's rabbit hole is going to be fasting. We're going to take you from the very beginning when Brad kind of first called me and said, hey, we got to try this, and all the way down to the absurd extreme, which, I mean, I thought we got extreme when we were testing it out, but it turned out we had customers and people we were working with go way more extreme than us.
Bringing you a reasoned approach to health and fitness. This is the Phi Life Podcast.
Welcome to the Phi Life Podcast. I'm John Barbin. With me is Brad Pilon, and today we're brought to you by the Total T Clinic. And so we're going to take you down a rabbit hole here. We're going to do this with a bunch of different things, but today's rabbit hole is going to be fasting. We're going to take you from the very beginning when Brad kind of first called me and said, hey, we got to try this, and all the way down to the absurd extreme, which, I mean, I thought we got extreme when we were testing it out, but it turned out we had customers and people we were working with go way more extreme than us. And it gets even more extreme in the research. And we'll take you all the way down to the most extreme cases we've seen. And then we'll bring you back at the end of the episode to where we think it's a takeaway useful message for you. But I think it's instructive to see how far people have gone with this, and where we went with it, where people we've worked with have went with it, where the research has gone with it. And then all of that will come at the end. We'll bring it back to what's something
where you should go with it.
Where you should go with it. Right.
Yeah.
All right. So Brad, you might as well
okay.
Start
go
off
back
here.
backwards, eh?
Yeah.
It was summer of 2006. So to give the listeners and viewers an idea, that was pre-iPhone. So iPhone was 2007. So John and I were texting back and forth on BlackBerries in this specific story. And it was after, I'm going to try to get this story timelines all together, but I had started my grad work, and then I had to abruptly change the topic of my grad work away from amino acids and protein synthesis to something that didn't involve any kind of supplement for reasons, right? From reasons that involve an old employer, et cetera. So I don't remember if it was me or Dr. Becker who was like, just too bad you can't study no intervention. And that was the kind of the wheel, right? And that's what got us kind of thinking about like studying fasting. And you and I, we were knee deep in online nutrition at this time. And we were actually online back before online was really a thing. We were also training young athletes or training hockey players. And we just over the course of it, I'm like, we should try this, right? Because I was already probably a little bit into the research review needed to do your graduate thesis. So we'd already been looking at the existing body of research, because make no mistake, there were in 2006 still dozens, if not hundreds, of published studies on fasting. They were 24 hours, 36, maybe the occasional 48, but the research was there. So it's not like John and I invented fasting. It's just that we were the first group to be like, we're going to curate all this information together into, at the time, not even a book. We weren't even thinking book. It was just me working on my thesis, right? And so it was probably then into 2007 that we actually started sort of experimenting around with it. Again, this was just for my grad thesis. It had nothing to do with an online book. It had nothing to do with anything, because at the time, intermittent fasting wasn't a thing, right? So predating Eat, Stop, Eat was The Warrior Diet by Ori Hofmeckler. I'm going to mess up his name. Sorry, Ori. But it was eat lightly during the day, kind of a natural circadian rhythm thing. Lightly during the day, and then your big, heavy meals at night. Kind of your predecessor to the 1 meal a day routine. And then there was a book we found later on called The Fast Five. And this is an interesting one because it was suggested to be published in 2005 online. I think it was only ever online, but we didn't find it until like 2009. So I don't know if the Dr. Bill, sorry, bud. Anyway, I don't know if he was selling it maybe kind of locally or in local bookshops first and then got online, or what the case may be, but we haven't seen that before. So at the time, we were studying fasting to see what happened to the human body and our physiology when you fasted, right? There was no diet book in the workings, none of that. It wasn't until 3/4 of the grad work was done where you and I actually started considering, hey, this could be a thing, right? And it was suggested, hey, this could be a thing after you and I tried it multiple times in multiple different variations and really started overcoming the massive amount of fear mongering and fear that had been built up in that era towards doing anything other than multiple meals per day, eating every 3 hours. Because if you didn't eat every 3 hours, you lost muscle, like in a 3-hour period, you gained fat and your metabolism crashed to the point where even though you were not eating, you were gaining fat, because that was the logic at the time. And it's really important everybody understands this wasn't the online logic at the time. This was the magazines, dietitians, your family doctor logic at the time. Multiple meals per day, 7 or 8 meals, small meals was the best way to I think it was based on maybe the South Beach diet or something earlier, but it was all about, sounds familiar here, controlling your insulin levels, right? So they didn't want any big spikes ever. And so that was the like pervasive view of how to eat. And then there's John and I going, we don't want to tell anybody, but we're not going to eat today. And we literally didn't want to tell anybody, right? Because the pushback was so severe. But we were secretly not eating. And then like we were type 2 diabetics, walking around with blood glucose meters, making sure we weren't about to die of being hypoglycemic, right? So I would go to Krav Maga, do some sparring, take a break, run to the bathroom, wash my finger off, check it, like, okay, I'm still good. Run back out and keep sparring, because that's how afraid I was. And then again, since it was pre-iPhone and BlackBerries had crappy cameras, it was me taking out our old digital Olympus camera and doing a selfie of my face to be like, am I shrinking? Like, am I getting gaunt? And do I look? People were telling me that, when you don't eat, you're gonna start looking gray and ashen. And so I was petrified. But that was the sort of the beginning of intermittent fasting. I want to just, before we get to your version, I want to touch on, which is really fascinating, is Martin Berkham of Lean Gains. Because it was like, if Eat Stop Eat came out December of 2007 on like the 14th, he launched Lean Gains on like the 1st. And so there was no copying, never met him before. I actually still haven't met him, right? It was just a weird serendipity that the three of us kind of had that same mindset at the same time. He went with the 16-8, where you fast every morning, and we went with the 24-hour fast once or twice a week. But there was no communication, even if you look at the blog posts from us previously, so when you and I used to do blog posts, or Martin did, there was no interconnection, no common think. And then just all of a sudden, these two, Eat Stop Eat and Lean Gains, kind of exploded on the scene in 2007. I say exploded, but not really. We got our asses handed to us constantly by the mainstream media, et cetera, for talking about fasting and encouraging disordered eating and all that kind of crap. But it was a fascinating start to our career in fasting, because it was kind of done in secret, and it was definitely a rebellious counterculture thing going on.
Yeah. I remember you called me. You're like, have you had dinner? I'm like, yeah. He's like, all right, don't eat till tomorrow. I'm like, wait, what? He's like, yeah, not till tomorrow's. Stop eating after dinner. Don't eat again until dinner tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like, hang on. What are you talking about? And then that was kind of, I at the time I was working with a startup, and we were developing a supplement line. So like, we had a protein powder, we had a creatine sort of muscle builder. We had 2 or 3 things going on, and I was at one of my coworkers' houses having dinner after. I can't remember what we're doing that day, and I hung up on the phone. I'm like, all right, so Brad said, like, I'm just not going to eat from after dinner till dinner tomorrow. And she was like, well, isn't that unhealthy? The very, very first person I said it to.
Yeah.
She's like, well, that can't be healthy. And I'm like, well, I don't know, man. He's almost done his thesis, and he's pretty convinced like there's nothing wrong with this, and I'm just going to do it. And then, but again, it didn't compute to her that that's like possible. And obviously people have had a busy day where they just sort of forget to eat. And I'm sure anyone can think through a day where like, oh yeah, I just kind of, I skipped breakfast. I had to go do this, that, and the next. And 20 hours later, this is the first time I ate. But you don't think about it. I'm sure everyone's had that kind of day without ever thinking, oh, I fasted that day. But that kind of the day just gets away from you sort of thing has happened to everybody at some point. So many people have likely experienced some degree of a 24-hour fast without even trying. It just sort of happened one day. But in this case, when I stated it to her, and I'm like, I'm intentionally doing this starting as soon as we're done dinner, she couldn't figure out any way that could possibly be healthy. And it was that started it. And then the other person we worked with the next day, same thing. He's like, dude, what are you doing? And it was just anybody I told it to, which I quickly learned not to tell.
Not to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Not to tell. Again, passing judgment. That's not healthy for you. How could that possibly be healthy? What are you doing? And I'm thinking, Brad's like 2/3 of the way done his master's thesis on this. I'm pretty sure he knows better than you right now, like if this is doable, but it's so out of the ordinary for the zeitgeist of North American dieting. And again, I'm working for a supplement startup. So I'm not talking about like my mom or whoever just eats whenever for whatever reason. I'm talking about people who are eyeballs deep in the health and fitness industry, who have bought into the 6 meals a day bodybuilding type thing. Like they're much more aware of this idea. There's a cause and effect to how you eat, but eating is like, and all of the information and all of the books and anything you would read about kept leading towards, oh, it's not 3 meals a day, it's 6 meals a day. But that, so it was more, and more often was the fitness idea of eating. So it was even more shocking to these people.
Yeah.
That the idea that I would just not eat. I'd imagine if I said it to my mom, she's like, oh yeah, back in Italy, like people would go days without eating. It just sort of happened. We were poor and we lived in a village.
Do you remember when we first launched Eat Stop Eat, like online, and you would get customers from Europe and Germany being like, duh. I'm like, no, not duh. Like no one in North America does this. Nobody doesn't eat. And they're like, everybody doesn't eat when they want to lose weight. I'm like, no, not over here. When we want to lose weight, we eat more and more often. And the person's just like, that's stupid. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, man. So we were getting feedback, from Europe on that. Do you remember the first copy of Eat Stop Eat? So we had handed out to various people to proofread and gave it to my parents. And we went down to my parents' place and they were in the backyard, and my dad sits down, looks at us, he's like, so you're obviously not publishing this. And we're like, what are you talking about? He's like, you'll lose all credibility. And we're kind of like, yeah, we're publishing it, right? So it got met with just amazing hostility originally. The local paper where my university was did a little article on intermittent fasting, and then the next week my university disowned me in an article. It was just a great feeling when the views of Mr. Pilon are not shared by the university. I was like, oh, thanks guys, that hurt, right? And then I thinking, you guys missed out because you could have been the school that launched intermittent fasting. But yeah,
think about that. We're talking about people who are tenured professors in exercise physiology and nutrition. That was our department, who wanted to distance themselves from a student who published a book saying you can actually take 24 hours off eating once in a while. And they wanted to make it clear publicly that they had nothing to do with that. That's so, I don't know, closed-minded, short-sighted. I don't,
but they also read and approved my thesis, so I'm like, I don't know how that works, right?
Well, yeah,
yeah.
Well, to be fair, Becker, our grad school
advisor.
Well, one of I think it was your advisor. My advisor was Julie, but Becker was one of like my primary guys. He was very forward thinking, so to his credit, he would have. He had a very open mind. He had a very open mind to all of this stuff. So that probably kind of greased the wheels to doing something a little controversial, even though there was a huge body of evidence on it. But to expand on the initial experience, so the first time I actually tried a fast, I had at the time a little anxiety about it, right? Because I'm like, okay, so I'm going to do this. And so, I mean, after dinner, it's no big deal because you're just going to go to bed and wake up. That's that first 8-10 hours, like whatever it is, 12 hours by the time you wake up. That's kind of like any other day. But then I was like, oh, okay, so I'm committing to this till 6 o'clock tonight. I'm not going to eat. And it did feel like it was kind of felt like a strange day, even though it's like, it's not even that much longer after you wake up to get to the end of the fast. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
so just all I
What
got
do
to
you
do is
do?
all I got to do is get to dinner. So don't eat breakfast, don't eat lunch, and then dinner. That doesn't, 24 hours specifically doesn't, when you actually add it up, it's not that much because
No.
half of it you're asleep, right?
Yeah, because
So-
divided between 2 days. That was always our little gimmick, right? Like if
Right.
you did it that way, it
Yeah.
was easier.
So I tried it the easiest way you could after dinner. So like, I don't know, we must have finished dinner 7-ish. So the next day I'm awake and we're milling around. Start your day by 8 something. It's already been 12 hours or 13 hours. So you only have, well, 11 more to go. And so I just, wasn't that hard. I made it to the end, but I had this like, I don't know what, I was anticipating something to go wrong. I was like,
Yeah.
all right,
yeah.
so now it's 13, now it's 14 out. Like, what's going to happen? Like, nothing happens, but there's this super heightened, like, something has to be different. This can't possibly be.
It has to feel different. Something
to.
has to happen. Yeah.
I'm going to crash. I can't work out. Like, I'm going to, should I even drive my car? Am I going to be like brain fog? Like, what's going to happen? And like, literally nothing happens besides you get like your stomach kind of grumbles at the moments where you normally would have eaten. So like,
because it's entrained, right? Like it's just
it's
by habit.
entrained. And I would say it's not even, and we know this from the data, it's not actually hunger as much as it is some of the mechanism of digestion can be trained on a rhythm such that there is a physiological change. If you always eat breakfast at 8, something's going to change around 8 o'clock. And
if you want an example of that for anyone who just normally eats breakfast, it's when you have to get up super early for work or for catch a flight, and you have breakfast at 4 a.m. instead of 7 when you normally do, and then your gut is just twisted all day because of it.
Yeah, so there's a rhythm to all of it. So that kind of, you get a little stomach grumbly at the times you would have eaten, like then and maybe 2 or 3 o'clock if I would have had some sort of lunchtime snack thing.
Yeah.
But other than that, and those things pass, in the moment you think, okay, this is it. This is the thing that's going wrong. Like, here we go, right?
Yeah.
But then after about 20 minutes or 10 minutes, it passes. And then you're like, oh, well, okay, what? That's it? And then, had dinner at 6 or whatever it was, 6 or 7. I was like, all right, that's it? Like, that's what I was
boring,
worried
right?
about.
Like, it's just nothing there.
Yeah. Yeah. But it was weird at the first time. I was expecting some, I don't know, major event, and it just sort of nothing happened.
My one was because I think my first one was like a 1 p.m. to 1 p.m. So a bit of a longer time period before I woke up the next morning. And that one was weird because I started my fast midday at like 185 pounds. And I woke up that next day at like 178, 179. So like a 6-pound loss. And that was the part where I'm like, I'm losing muscle for sure. Right? Like I was so afraid, but it's just the water volume, right? And and you're used to, because you and I were sort of bodybuilders at heart, that multiple meals per day, you're always full of food and that has weight. And you're full of fluid and that has weight, right? So to actually finally give your body a chance to digest and absorb and assimilate everything that you've put into it is a really weird feeling. I was that next day at the gym, the Y in Waterdown, and I was doing flat incline dumbbell press. And I was just astounded by, like, my stomach went in at the ribs, like it was hollow, right? And I was just so used that your stomach was always kind of full. And I'm like, this is I feel like a wasp waist, right? Just the weirdest feeling to kind of be empty, right? Because we would eat as bodybuilders right up until bed. And this was when you're, late 20s, early 30s. So bed was probably like midnight. And then the very first thing when you got up at 6 a.m., 7 a.m. to get ready for work was eat. So there is no window in there where you were truly in anything other than post-absorptive or eating. So to finally have that feeling of like, oh, I'm empty. Like I'm lighter. That was that was the one feeling I'm like, oh, that's different. Especially when in the gym, just laying down, holding the weight and feeling your t-shirt kind of like fold down. That was a big aha for me when I was really worried. And we had access to some measurements at the time. And so you're like, no, my weight's normal. And then of course, when I started eating again, I was back up to like 182, 183. These are pounds, sorry. And then you go, okay, this is just water flux and just the amount of food that's always in your system, which is kind of a weird thing when you think about it. You're always sort of a half full tube, to be kind of gross, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And that was very revealing that you could go up and down that much weight purely from what we realized was water weight. I mean, if people don't realize, when you eat carbs on a regular basis, any amount of carbs, to store glycogen, there's a certain amount of water that has to be stored with the glycogen, both in your muscles and not so much in your livers. But when you're storing glycogen in any cell, some amount of water comes with it. And the way we were eating, kind of like Brad said, like 4 or 5 times a day, and not necessarily overeating, but just definitely not in a deficit. Your body is processing some of that food almost constantly, so you're never truly empty or truly fasted.
The machinery of your GI tract is constantly on. That's
always going. There's
working.
always there's always something at one level of the process is always going, and with that consistent carbohydrate intake, not that we were just eating carbs, we're just eating normal mixed meals of food, and working out, you're constantly holding the water that's necessary to store along with the glycogen. As you store glycogen, water comes with it. I think it's like a 2-to-1 ratio. So it's a fair bit of water that just must be present to store glycogen. And when you fast for the very first time, you slowly work your way through a lot of that glycogen, and it's dramatic. Like I would change 8 or 9 pounds in water.
Yeah.
It's
crazy.
Fat, right? Obviously, it's not fat in 24 hours.
And it was such a different feeling. Well, that's a good segue into, so obviously being dumb, once John and I kind of got comfortable with the 24-hour fast, the next obvious thing was 36, 48, 72. Mm-hmm. And that was when you really started realizing that initial weight loss, I'm using my hand, but you can't see it, then kind of peaked out and slowed down, right? So you might lose, once kind of normalized, let's say 4 or 5 pounds in the first 24 hours, but then 1.5 pounds in 36, and then maybe additional 0.5 pound to 72. Like it really slowed down. And the startling thing about the longer fast is that the only thing that changed was that you were just absolutely bored without eating or thinking about food or planning food. You ended up, I never went past 72 because I'm like, this is boring. Like there's no, you're not hungry, right? You've almost gone past being hungry, but you're bored and want to eat because you're bored, because you're not eating. Just a vicious cycle of boredom and food.
Yeah. Somewhere between 36 and 48 hours, you don't have those little hunger grumbles at at your scheduled eating times, and then you just don't experience hunger at all. And I did.
It's just off, right?
Yeah. So let's get into how far we both took it. I tried a 36, which seems like 24 almost seems like cheating when you're like, oh, this is too easy because I had
especially
dinner.
Because split between 2 days, you slept through half, right?
Yeah, because if 24 specifically, you eat every single calendar day, right?
Yeah.
So if I stop at dinner, I get to start again tomorrow at dinner. 36 feels more like you took an entire day out of the week, because if you stop at dinner, well, you make it all the way through past next dinner, you go to sleep, wake up, and then you can have breakfast. So if I stopped at Monday night dinner, I don't start again till Wednesday breakfast. So really, like I eliminated Tuesday. I eliminated sleep, Tuesday sleep. Now I start Wednesday. So 36 feels more like you really took an entire day out of the week. Mm-hmm. But even then, it's very possible that after 36 hours, you wake up and you're like, I don't actually feel like eating. Like you might not at all. And so I tried 36s. Those are quite manageable once you tried 1 or 2.
Yeah.
And then I did a 40. I'm like, okay, let's, if we're going to be telling people and selling this to people and coaching people, we better know what this feels like way past 24. Like if people go, what's 25? Like we better know, right?
Yeah.
So
it's a good point. Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I've stopped all the time at 24. I have no idea what's going to happen to you. So then, tried a 36. Those became quite like, I'm going to do 36 this time.
Yeah. I can only do 136 a week though. Like it's not like something you can do
not two.
I couldn't do every other day fasting. That'd be too much. Yeah.
It's almost like if I was going to do 24s, I'd do 2 of those in a week, or if I was going to go once, I'd just do a 36. And that was like the one for the week. But then 48 was totally manageable. I remember coaching some people who did, and we would working out throughout all of this.
Oh yeah.
It's not like, I got to stay away from the gym. I got to be on the couch. I got to preserve it. None of that. You just still live your regular life. And when I realized how much work you can really do in a fasted state. Now, young, healthy athletes, by the way, this was and not just myself, but not that I was a young, healthy athlete, but young, healthy athletes were also trying this. And I had one who did a 20K run at 40 hours fasted.
Yeah.
including
And not 40
normal-
hours fasting, eat, then a 20K run. She fasted for 40, then ran. So it's basically a 41-hour fast, right? Like,
Yeah, at the 40-hour mark, ran 20K, and also was doing normal weight training throughout it. And only after that 40K run, she was like, "Okay, I don't want to do that again. That's not like the best feeling. I probably kind of want to eat now." But that was about the degree of like discomfort. She was mostly like, "All right, that's enough. Like that's okay. That was enough." And not like she was passing out or anything. It was just, not ideal, I guess you could say, but totally doable. Half marathon at 40 hours fasted. So
we work with a rugby sevens team, and I encourage them to do a scrimmage fasted. And the reason for that was because one thing I noticed working with young athletes, I guess young, like in their 20s, was the degree to which nutrition became a crutch for these people. So like if I didn't have my exact amount of protein and oatmeal before, our session, I just didn't feel right. And I'm like, dude, I guarantee you it was probably about 18 hours of fasting, you guys can still go out and play a scrimmage. And it was sort of eye-opening for everyone because, exactly for that reason. We were like, oh, yeah, that was, it wasn't perfect, but it was doable. And we're using that kind of as a way to treat them, be like, you should be able to perform in less than ideal circumstances. And one of those less than ideal circumstances being, okay, you get to your match and there isn't your favorite Gatorade or your favorite energy bar or chicken and pasta available. You just have to go. Right. So I thought that it created a very valuable lesson, but just watching them all perform, and no one was coming off the field being like, I can't go. Right. Like none of them. Now, again, to your point, young, healthy athletes, but still not what the average person in 2000, this would have been 8 or 9, would have expected. Right. They probably all should have just passed out on the field.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. So, and that was a good point you brought up about like using nutrition as a crutch. It's like, come on, we knew at this point, we were already getting pretty familiar with like, it's not going to be detrimental. I don't even think it really affect your performance for no other reason other than psychosomatic. Like you just imagine, I this can't possibly work. Like I can't possibly be at my peak. But it kind of toughens you up a little bit when you realize, oh, right, I can totally just do this.
I did a powerlifting push-pull fasted.
Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it was the same as any other push-pull.
Yeah. It's not, it won't, it's just anything 24 hours and under is not going to have that much of an impact. If anything, if they think it was causing,
that was what I was going to get to. Exactly. Yeah.
It's they're not in their happy place. We're like, well, I normally eat. So it's an expectation. It's a psychosomatic expectation. And they almost might, I don't know, psychologically sabotage it because we're like, this can't possibly work because I normally have my pre-competition meal 3 hours ago. And so now they're psychologically a little off, but physiologically we can show pretty definitively that absolutely nothing's changed.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump forward a little bit. I think it was 2000, I want to say 9, Roe was born. We had a group from London interview us, do a big long interview for the London Times, and then take the info from that, turn it into a documentary called, I think it was like Fast Living or something like that. Then take that documentary and turn it to a book called The 5-2 Diet. Right? So it became an immensely popular, way better branding than Eat, Stop, Eat, 5-2 Diet, which we thought of it. But it really catapulted that style of fasting into the limelight. Now, by the time the book came out, and I don't remember the exact story. I don't know if it was the publisher's idea or just them switching it. It wasn't pure fasting. So it was like guys were allowed 600 calories during the fast, so like a Subway sandwich, and women were allowed, I think it was like 350. So like it's a 6-inch sub, right? They were still allowed food during the fast. But when the documentary came out, it was a
low calorie.
Yeah. The documentary, it was intermittent eating at that point, right? Intermittent dieting. But the documentary was on fasting. And we had a really weird phenomenon happened where people would email in to John and I and be like, I tried fasting and it felt horrible. And then someone else would email in and like, this was the greatest thing I've ever tried. It was amazing. And we're like, what is going on? Like, where are all these people coming from all of a sudden that where the fasting is like, we've gone 3 years now with people really enjoying it. And all of a sudden, all these people were emailing us saying they're trying it. They didn't like it. And we tracked it back, and it was people who watched the documentary, became interested, and just started fasting. And we figured out what happened was they were starting fasting under the preconception they were doing something bad or wrong for their body. They were testing it, but they weren't sure. Whereas the people who had read Eat, Stop, Eat, which at the time was probably about 200 pages, we kind of expanded it as we went. They were more comfortable with the idea because all of the reasons why they think it might not be good for them, John and I had covered in the book. So because their preconceived notion was like, this should be fine, it was all right. But the ones who just heard from a friend who saw a documentary to try fasting and were like, I'm going to do it, but I don't think I'm going to feel good doing it, ended up not feeling well doing it. So there really was a mental component to fasting. And I think that's why you and I still to this day have no problems doing it, but other people sometimes can, is if you think you're doing something wrong to your body, it's not going to feel great while you're doing it.
Yeah, and that was the hugest thing that we learned is like your expectation going into it is going to dictate the experience. I mean, there's data to show that people can actually experience the symptoms of hypoglycemia without actually having low blood sugar if they're convinced something's going wrong. They, I guess you could almost say, manifest the symptoms based on their psychology, which is crazy to me, but that actually there's pretty good research showing that. So if you expect something to go wrong, you're going to feel it, even though we can't measure anything wrong. Yeah. So Eat, Stop, Eat, like you read Eat, Stop, Eat. By the end of it, you're like, all right, that's rational. Every possible thing. Yep, I can do it. Every possible outcome is outlined. All the things you might bump into, like as far as feelings go, it's all there. So by the end of it, you kind of know. You're like, I know what to expect in the next 24 hours. And as those things arrive, you're like, yep, nope, I read about this. This is coming. This is coming. Those little stomach grumbles, maybe the dump of water. The first time I fast, I can't sleep. Like the first time I tried it, it just keeps you up at night if you're not accustomed to it.
It's just switching around your start-stop times can be miraculous and that kind of thing, right? And that was the other point, was getting across people. I was like, 7 p.m. to 7 p.m. didn't feel great. Try 5 p.m. to 5 p.m. And people are like, what difference would that make? And it's this world of difference, right? Like it's just switching them up. And then just because 5 p.m. to 5 p.m. was working well for a couple of months, all of a sudden you're like, that's not really fitting anymore. And you go back to 7 p.m. to 7 p.m. or you go 2 p.m. to 2 p.m. and all of a sudden it's a world of difference again. So, and that was one of the things in terms of like, making like macro issues of the micro details of fasting, where people are like, but when do you start? And I'm like, whenever you want. Or like, wait, but hold on. Okay, work with me here. If I eat dinner and finish at 7, and then I fast until 7 the next day, but have dinner, technically, I'm only skipping 2 meals. I'm like, yeah, but you still fasted for 24 hours. Like, yeah, but only 2 meals. I'm like, I don't like, people got caught up on the 2 versus 3 meals. And then like, technically I need to then miss dinner the next day. Right. I'm like, no, it's 24 hours. Right. And then you had, I remember one of our friends was like, yeah, but I tried it. Not like it felt normal. And then over the course of the conversation, what they had, it was just like pop and stuff like that. It's like, well, no, like liquids don't count. And you're like, well, that's why you read the book. Like liquids count. So your milkshakes and all that. It wasn't a juice fast. It's actually a fast, right? Like, so those were interesting. People like really getting caught up in the minutiae and the details of it. And my favorite one, right, is Eat, Stop, Eat is a 24-hour fast once or twice a week. And if for the first 3 or 4 years that book was published, the emails every day would be, is it once or twice per week? ? You're like, well, if it's once every 5 days, it could be 2 times this week, once next week. Like people wanted these hard, rigid rules. And what you and I found was those people were more in line with maybe the 16-8 style fast, where it's every day, I don't eat until 2. Nothing. Like, I don't care if I'm at a wedding or a birthday party or I'm at a dinner to celebrate my promotion. I do not eat until 2, and I'm done eating at 10. And there's some people who just needed that. And then for you, me, and like everyone else who need a bit more flexibility and be like, look, I was going to fast today, but I got something going on. I'm going to do it tomorrow.
Yeah. And that's interesting that we thought the benefit was the flexibility, but that some people just want the structure. And we thought that's too restrictive. But and so there's different people. Some people want the structure and they need it, and they need that answer, 1 or 2, tell me, or every 5 days, whatever it is, I need that structure. So anyway, we learned along the way, the flexibility is one thing, the structure is another thing, and it suits one person versus another, accordingly. It doesn't have to be, either or. It's just whatever works for you. But going a little further down the fasting rabbit hole, I don't know how far you took things, Brad, but I went from 36 to 48. Then I tried a 72. Again, 72, no big deal. I kind of phrased it as like being on cruise control after 48 hours, like
Right.
no hunger. The major issue, like Brad brought up, was the boredom. Because the moments when other people are eating, you kind of don't want to sit there with them. So whoever
Yeah.
you normally would be eating,
It drives
lunch or-
people crazy too if you go
Right.
to dinner and you don't eat.
Right.
Yeah, no.
So you just sort of exclude yourself from those. Then that's when you realize, oh, almost every social interaction revolves around food. Like there's almost nothing you do that socially, when you gather together with people, that doesn't have some consumption component, either drink or food or both. So you kind of just skip all that stuff because it's too tempting or too awkward when you're like sitting there not eating.
When you
and they
don't
are.
break bread with someone, when they're eating and you turn it down, it's not a good feeling socially.
It is weird. It's super weird. And that's why what Brad said on a previous podcast, don't do that. Like don't attend any sort of eating event if you're fasting in that moment. Just don't go. Just exclude yourself from that one. Yeah. But when you do a 72-hour fast, you're signing off for 3 days of like, no, I'll see you in 3 days as far as any of that type of social interaction. So I tried 72. That was no problem. Then I did 5 days. The most I did was 5 days.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I would have coffees, not with any calories in them, like a black coffee with like a sweetener. So I had some kind of, it's not like it was just water. I had
Because flavor is what you miss, right? That's,
a lot of what you miss. And even 5 days later, I actually had the thought, I'm like, I wonder when I'm going to be hungry. Because 5 days in, again, the challenge is just the social component. There's no hunger at that point. Even those little hunger pangs go away, at least for me. So 5 days in, I actually thought that it's got to be at least a week. There's no way I'm just going to wake up hungry tomorrow. I wonder where the hunger starts kicking in.
Right.
So I never went past 5 days. It was just, and again, there was that empty feeling, like you're kind of, you've normalized, you're not like dropping weight anymore. The big weight drop happens in the first 36 hours or so.
Right.
And then after that, you're just kind of have this sort of, I don't want to say it's not light, but it's like you can tell there's just nothing in your system. Like you just, obviously you haven't eaten anything. It's just, for me, it was just coffee and water. So I'm like, okay, that's all right. So 5 days for sure, no hunger. I wonder when it happens. Then I started thinking, I don't think people know what hunger feels like. Like, I don't actually think we know what that feels like.
Oh, we know what denial of the food you want to eat at that given time feels like.
Right.
That's
and
hunger.
we know what I would like to eat because it's time to eat feels like.
Yeah.
And I know what, like, oh, it's exciting to eat because we're going out to do something, or it's dinner time and we're all going to sit around and like the familiar cues about eating. And food is like fun to eat. Like, we like eating food. It's not just fuel or anything. But when you're fasting for that long, it starts to give some clarity on like, okay, so I can't actually put my finger on what the feeling of hunger is, because I don't think any of what you do on a daily basis has anything to do with hunger, proper hunger. There's other things going on in there that's not obviously just hunger. So there's just different things that you learn when you just when you don't have the presence of food for that long. And then after 5 days, I just started eating again. So, okay, it's fine. There was nothing dramatic about eating again. But there's just a clarity. There's just a clarity about like how your body cues you with food and cues you with other food stimulus.
Yeah, I learned from longer fasts that being hangry was directly related to not being able to eat when you wanted to eat. Right? So, because you didn't really get hangry when you're fasting, but at any given time where you were trying to get somewhere and you want to stop for food, but you can't stop for food because you're running late, that's hangry. Right? Or like you've got to go pick up the kids, but I wanted to eat, but okay, fine. I'll get the kids and then I'll come home and make dinner. That's hangry. But saying, hey, I'm purposely not going to eat for 24 hours doesn't have that same effect. So it really is a management expectations that really causes the hangriness. I settled down on 24 because we started doing 36s and then even like multiple 48s, so like 2 48s a week. And what I noticed was just that the benefits weren't any different. Like, it's not like the weight loss, it should, but your body compensates on the times where you're eating. but it just was like, well, this is a bit more miserable for not much more benefit. So we stuck with 24, and then I tried 1 meal a day, and that's just not pleasing, right? It's just dinner every day, and I'm a big fan of brunch and lunch and eating when I want to. So you and I came down with the concept there of it's really just a pattern interrupt, right? We were using a 24-hour fast to break up our periods of fasting so that when we were getting ready for a show or trying to lean out, you basically only had to plan for 3 to 5 days. And then you were done, you fasted, and you kind of started over for 3 to 5 days. And it broke up the monotony of dieting so nicely. And then it allowed also those 3 to 5 days to have a bit higher calories so they weren't as miserable. And then you were like, oh, we're just sort of chunking all the dieting into small periods of time. So in a weird way, it still became about eating, right? Because we were just finding a way to optimize the eating process. And by not eating once or twice a week, when you were eating, you got a bit more calories. And then you only had to focus on a 3 to 5 day diet as opposed to a 12-week cut sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so 48 twice a week, that's a lot. That's pretty extreme. And we've had people we work with go to like 9 straight days not eating.
Yeah.
And then we never asked anyone to do that. We never recommended it. I mean, I know we talked about when we tried 48 and 72.
People just want to know what it feels like, right? And
I mean, they wanted to, once they had a little bit of a boost. Also, you get that boost at the beginning. You get that big water dump.
Yeah, the clarity,
it's like,
right? Like
clarity. It's kind of motivating. You're like, whoa.
Yeah.
You wake up like 8 or 9 pounds lighter. No, it's not fat. You can't lose that much fat in a day, but it just something.
You're still smaller. You're still smaller and lighter. That water took up space. Yeah.
Right. So you're like, oh, you kind of build like a momentum like right away, and then you sort of stay on that train. And yeah, we've had people tell us like, oh, I'm at my 9th day of fasting. I'm like, whoa.
Why?
We didn't tell you to do that, but knock yourself out. Keep us posted anyways. But like, we obviously never told you to do that. And it gets to the point where you can start having like you really need to put some protein back. I mean, you really just have to start eating again. Like it's just, that's pretty long. Now, there is research on some medically supervised fasts that lasted over a year.
Over a year.
Now, this is like a morbidly obese
that was crazy.
Subject. Now, that's medically supervised. They're obviously giving them vitamins, minerals, electrolyte, things that you have to have present that you just can't.
That is medically supervised, for
right?
Sure.
So that's different. But I think that was 380 days or 70, something like that. It was long. Lost like over 100 pounds. But again, that's nothing to do with what anyone, trying to lose some weight is gonna do. But that's how extreme it has gotten in the literature. But for our experience and what people we've ever worked with, the most extreme is a few people have told us they've pushed it 7 days or longer.
Yeah.
And throughout, just to finish, throughout when I was doing the 48s, the 72s, and the 5 day, I only did the 5 day once. We had the glucose meters. I was testing blood, and it was your glucose kind of just does its thing. So if you have normal blood glucose control, meaning you're not diabetic, you haven't been diagnosed with that, there's nothing, you're not on metabolic syndrome, there's nothing going on that you're aware of, and it's your body can control glucose normally. Nothing should change while you're fasting. It'll just fluctuate along its normal line. I remember a buddy of ours at the time tried it, and tried just a 24-hour, and at around 17-ish, 18 hours, he goes hypoglycemic. But, afterwards he tells me, well, he's like, but I tend towards hypoglycemia, and I've already been, my doctor's already told me about this. I'm like, well, then what are you fasting for? Like, why didn't you tell me that before you tried? He's like, well, I don't know. I wanted to see what it would do. So in his case, it wasn't the smartest thing to try.
Yeah.
But if he'd have told me ahead of time, I would have kind of said, well, maybe back off. But for him, he could go 16 hours
Yeah.
comfortable. And it really dramatically changed on him right around the 18-hour mark. So
that's right around where the RQ is just respiratory quotient drops enough that you should be burning not exclusively, but almost exclusively fat right around that time, depending on how big your previous meal was. So it was at any time where he had to really kick over from glucose to fatty acid metabolism, then that's where if you can't kick over properly because you're diabetic or close to it, then you can go pretty hypoglycemic.
Mm-hmm. So that's informative. That was informative that, okay. So whether or not you have a full on diagnosis, if you're aware of this sort of thing, you can't just jump right in. And so for him, 16 was the limit. And But but he used it. He incorporated it into his strategy. But again, he couldn't ever attempt what we were doing.
Yeah. And then the whole why fast, right, is, again, with the topics that we've covered in this podcast and the honesty of it, for the vast majority of people, the answer to why fast is weight loss. And there's a few people who are trying it out for health reasons, but generally it's weight loss, right? And really, from our findings, the actual answer to why fast is because it makes dieting easier, right? It makes the 3 to 5 days you're not fasting, those calories being higher, and the time frame you have to think about only being 3 to 5 days as opposed to 12 weeks makes it easier. But the other thing is, it's two ways, independent of each other, or I guess dependent, to stack wins. So it's a pretty cool feeling the first time you say, okay, I am not going to eat for 24 hours. And then in 24 hours, you go, I didn't eat for 24 hours. Like, you're done. It's over. You won. You don't have to keep going until you eventually fail. It's over. You did it. Like, you're wicked. And then you think to yourself, okay, now for the next 3 to 5 days, I'm not going to fast again until Friday. I just got to really make sure that I don't do anything stupid with my food. And then Friday rolls around. You're like, oh, yeah, I was pretty successful. That was actually pretty good. And then you're going to do a fast, but you already know you can do a 24-hour fast because you just did one. So you hit a 24-hour fast and that was successful. And then you're like, hey, for this next 3 to 5 days of eating, I'm just going to make sure I got my protein in check, and I'm going to, make sure it's not a lot of junk food. And then you do that. Or if, let's say, you do mess up in that 3 to 5 days, you're like, oh, I should not have gone out for wings with John. That was dumb. But then you fast and you start over again. So it becomes a really good way to avoid that slow, monotonous march to failure that happens with most diets. You sort of you build up wins, and if you make a mistake, you get a reset button in your fast. I think that's the main reason. It just makes everything easier and in a smaller, chunkier time frame.
Yeah, and that's a really good point too. The periodic wins, because dieting usually is a series of fumbling failures. Yeah. And even if you successfully diet without fasting at all, you just adjust some food, reduce your calories.
You have books on the negatives of the ultimate result. What happens when you're on a long-term diet and you fail? The average person then comes back stricter the next time, and then fails and stricter the next time, right?
Yeah, but fasting is one of the only sustainable tools where you can just always come back to it. And I guess to Brad's point, and which I think is a very underrated or not underreported benefit, is like it's these little micro wins. And each one of those, it's a total sense of accomplishment to actually finish, even though 24 hours isn't super long. For anyone who hasn't tried it, that definitely is a feeling of a sense of accomplishment. Yeah. And then the locus of control becomes like you're in control. Like it's one of the only. But the fact that it has a beginning and an end, and you get to the end, and you can be like, okay, that I won that one. Like I won. Yeah. That's. Not too many diets that you can really say you won. It's almost like you're just constantly climbing the hill. If you're low carb, or if you set a calorie total, and it's just, calories have to come down some amount to lose weight. So this is tough. And if it's every single day, the challenge is just so omnipresent. It kind of feels like it almost feels like it kind of is pressing you down like daily. And at some point you're like, this is just too much. But if like, I need to win Tuesday, and then I need to win again on Sunday, and that's it. Yeah. And then the rest of the week, there's so much less pressure to get between the two fasts. Oh yeah. And so that was, there's a lot of positive forward momentum with that style of dieting that is just not really ever, until you do it, it's not obvious. There's all this positive momentum that you just can't experience with any other real diet.
Yeah. Oh, dude, you know what kills me? I'm going to bring this up. Is when people say, yeah, but it's just calorie restriction. And you're like, yeah, but by definition, it's the epitome of calorie restriction. Like, how would you fast without and still consume calories, right? Like, it's this weird, like, no, of course it's calorie restriction. It's the penultimate calorie restriction where the calories are zero. And we're seeing what happens to your body when you're at as low of calories as you can possibly go. So it's always calorie restriction, which is really weird when people make that argument, because you're sitting there going like, by definition, we're talking about 0 calories for a 24-hour period. It can't not be calorie restriction. So I think what people miss is that severity is the wrong word. It's the degree of calorie restriction. The fact that it's zero or as close to zero as you can get that makes fasting unique, not the fact that it's somehow not calorie restriction because, again, by definition, they have to be restricted. Yeah. So I find that one always funny. The other one I find funny is still to this day, like the need to feed people or to make sure people are okay. So I was at an office and people were going out for lunch and I didn't go because I was meeting you for lunch at 2. And I also happened to be fasting, but I was literally meeting you at 2. So why would I go out with these guys? And the receptionist, and she's an awesome lady, she brought me back a muffin to tide me over because she was worried that I didn't have lunch at noon and I was waiting till 2. And so the fasting makes you really aware of the cultural habits and the preconceptions we have about when you should and shouldn't eat, the fact that you should always have something to tide you over. And I don't know how a 700 calorie muffin supposed to tide me over. It was probably as big as the lunch we were about to have, right? So, but it's those, fasting makes you really aware of that. And then if you can carry that into the times where you're eating, then you're better at eating. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we even like to talk to people like, look, I don't even care if you don't do eat, stop, eat fasting for the rest of your life. Let's say you do it for 6-7 weeks and you're like, yeah, not really for me, which is cool. I'm just hoping that by doing it full 24 hours instead of some of those more micro fasts, you do pick up on those things that drive you to eat or habits that you have that could cause you to overeat. Like if I were to have had I think it was like a 500 calorie, I think 7 is a bit of an exaggeration, muffin, and then gone out to have lunch with you, it's not like I would have gone, oh, John, I had a muffin, so I'm going to cut back on what we're having. I would have had the same amount. And then by the end of that day, I probably would have been over by 500-600 calories. Mm-hmm. So, but you learn these things through fasting. You're like, no, I do not need anything to tide me over here. Similar to the rugby players, right? Okay, crappy, the food wasn't available. We can still play at a high level. We're fine. Right? So it's that learning that gives people, I guess, just more actionable stuff to do with eating, but learned and picked up through fasting, if that makes sense.
100%. The absence of food teaches you a lot about what cues you to eat food and how long you can last. I don't even want, that's a bad way to say it. That nothing's going to go wrong in the absence of food. Anything less than 48 hours, it's nothing much is going to change besides you just might perceive you want some food, but physiologically, nothing's really changing. So there's nothing dangerous about it. You might just get irritated because you missed out on a meal you kind of were hoping to have with somebody at a certain time. But I guess we should kind of get to towards the end here, the actionable steps and what to take out of all of this. So we brought you all the way to like the extreme. Like I went all the way to 5 days. Brad's done 48 hours twice a week, which is like chopping out half the 4 days of the week. Yeah. We know people who've done 7, 8, 9 days, I think. None of that's necessary. Those were all learning experiences for us. Yeah. But we learned, your blood glucose stays, hunger kind of is not even present. Nothing really goes wrong, but you'd like to eat and you don't have to take it to that degree. So I guess the lessons or the messages from seeing how extreme it is and kind of nothing actually goes wrong, but it's a learning.
There's no benefit to the longer. Everyone, they do it, right? They do it 20. Now, the key to eat, stop, eat is that 24 hours. That's your cutoff, right? You don't keep going until you can't go anymore, which is what we did originally. In fact, I'm fine with it being 24-ish hours. If it ends up being 22 because you had a dinner date, that's fine. But the need to then, and I'm not blaming anybody because we were the same, but then you start thinking of creative things like, what if I didn't eat during weekdays and only ate on weekends? Like you start doing that. And then this is 2024. We published the book in 2007. We started fasting in 2006. I'm not going to do the math. That's like 18 years of fasting. And our best results are from 24-ish hours of fasting once or twice a week combined with decent eating. Mm-hmm. And any attempt to speed it up or to make it more severe just bites you later on.
Yep. And after going through all of the various levels of it to the extreme, it's a tool now, and I know, I don't even think about it as much as I know, like, oh yeah, I'm just going to back off until lunch today or back off till dinner today. Now it's it's I don't have to formalize it, but at all. I'm just like, yeah, I'm just going to take today.
You've given
most of
yourself
today.
permission not to eat when you don't feel like eating.
Right.
Like that,
And with the full confidence that nothing's going to change. I'm going to get through the day. I'm going to get through a workout. I'm not going to be any different than I am any other day. I'm just taking X number of hours off this today, and I'll start eating at some point later today. So that's just part of it. It's just part of how we eat. And there's nothing, it throws this concept of having to eat a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner, or the 5 meal. All of that's gone now. Now it's just eat when you choose to eat. And it's a very useful tool that I know the limits of. And when it just becomes like, I'm not, 36 is too long, but I can for sure wait till dinner tonight. And now it's just become a very, very usable tool after going through all of the experiences of long ones and short ones.
I just taper mine based on usually my waist, right? So if my waist is 33 inches or under, I fast Sunday to Monday. And if it's, let's say, 34 or over, then I'm back on 2 fasts. And then to your point, then sometimes even when I'm lower, but I know that the last 3 or 4 days have been pretty heavy with the eating, I might throw in an extra one. So again, a tool. Now if they're over 24, it's just because it took me some time to get to where I wanted to go to eat, right? So let's say at 24 hours, I'm like, I want to go get Panera bread, right? So it's 24 and a half because there's no Paneras close to me. And sometimes it's 22 because I'm almost done my fast and you're like, hey, let's go get some food. And I'm like, yeah, close enough, right? So, but using it as a tool and just a way to kind of sometimes break up the monotony of eating. And like occasionally do it when, when you've just eaten something that's not quite right and your stomach is just not settling down. I'll throw a 24-hour fast in then. Just like, hey, reset, right? Like, let's calm this thing down. But I don't get caught up in the minutia of the hormonal cascades or the lining up my fast with the amount of lumens I'm getting from sunlight, that kind of thing. I just sort of use it as a tool when it suits. And it's 18 years later. I was actually talking to you off air about it, but I actually found the CD, I guess technically the DVD of the old bodybuilding contest I did. And I was looking at it going, I'm probably in better shape most summers than I was on stage that day. It's just from regulating with fasting versus trying to get as lean as possible while being deathly afraid of eating less than 8 meals a day. Right? So just by giving myself permission to loosen up a bit, I now find it easier to get leaner.
Yeah, I agree. And that it's a tool that makes same thing for me and anyone that I've ever worked with. Like if they've adopted fasting for any length of time, it becomes a tool that same thing. Everything becomes a bit easier knowing that there's no such thing as the strictest 3 meals a day is better than 6 meals a day or 6 meals better than 3. Actually, none of it matters. What matters is what fits for you. And fasting kind of opens people up to how flexible things really are.
Yeah. And, we have some general quick ideas. Like we think that there's a bit of a pyramid. So the whole 8 meals a day kind of works when you're 12, 13, 14, right? And then kind of up from that, and then you're like more like a 5 meal. And then as an adult, 3-ish, but you balance it out and you kind of just do with what works for you. And it really just comes down to that. We've tried to overly complicate diet so much. And then you get hyper focused on your specific culture and the way they eat. But then when you look at the totality of cultures on earth, you're kind of like, you just kind of eat as much as sustains you and take breaks when you're full. And that will kind of get you where you're going. But the early 70s, 80s, 90s North American approach would be like, I don't care if you're full, you have to eat now, is what I think a pretty big detriment to our overall health.
In the end, it's the ultimate simplification of diet. If it's all of it's just overwhelming you, just take some time off. That's the easiest possible intervention.
Done.
Yep. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to leave it for today. What do you
For
think?
sure.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So for Brad Pilon, I'm John Barbin, and that's your Phi Life Podcast.